Since 1887, the Stonington Free Library has been a center for knowledge, ideas, creativity, and entertainment. It is a comfortable and welcoming community space for the town of Stonington, Connecticut, where all ages can explore, discover, gather, and learn within a building of distinctive and unique architecture. This video program is an evolution to expand the offerings of the library to share directly in your home or organization. Welcome to the Thoughtful Thursdays speaker series, made available to you by the Stonington Free Library.
So my name is Carla. I'm the Assistant Director at Stonington Free Library. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And I know a lot of us are excited about painting, so thanks for your enthusiasm. I also want to thank Roxanne for presenting this program and for all the work she's put into it. And I'm also grateful to all of the staff and volunteers at Stonington Free Library for making events like this possible. We also had an anonymous donor who provided funding for some art supplies, and some folks are using those supplies.
Yay, that's so nice.
Yes, isn't it? We are going to have everyone keep their microphones muted. And if you have a question, you can go ahead and type that in the chat box, and then I'll read it out loud and Roxanne can respond. And that will help us to all focus and hear during the program. And then I recommend to be able to see the presenter the best, if you select speaker view on the top right of your screen. That can be really helpful. And we are recording the program, but any personal information such as names will be edited out before we post the video on our YouTube channel. So now I'm going to turn it over to a member of our Board of Trustees and a member of the program committee, Catherine Procco.
Hello, everyone. I'm Catherine. I'm so happy that you are here with us today, and I am very thrilled to introduce Roxanne. Roxanne is an artist, a traveler, gardener, nature lover, and beloved teacher. She began experimenting with art in her younger years, painting through watercolors, pastels, oils, and acrylics. Throughout her years as a Navy wife, she found opportunities to continue her love of painting through each place that her family landed. While she resides in southeastern Connecticut, she also leads artist workshops in the US and across the map. So please join me in welcoming Roxanne Steed.
Thanks, Catherine. I sure appreciate it. Thanks for the good, sweet introduction. So I am so excited to be here tonight. I've got a lot to share with you, and some of you may have heard some of the parts before, but there's another part that I'm going to explain that's I haven't really taught this part in a class quite this way. So let me bring my camera down in just a second, but I'm going to be showing you my secret to watercolor. It's the most basic thing that I feel like if you learn anything tonight, this is like the most important thing, and it'll make watercolor so much easier for you. So I always stress it. And you can also find it on my website. It's roxannesteed.com. And there's a little pop-up box. So if you kind of missed this part of the video and you want to see it in more depth, I have that on my website. It's a free tutorial. And also I'm going to be talking about brushwork, how you can make this little teeny tool do the most work for you with the least amount of work from you. So, and then once you kind of understand some fun ways to do some brushwork, you'll see all the different ways that you can put it together. So let me bring the camera down and just kind of give you an overview of some of the things that we're going to do tonight. So when I talk about brushwork, we're going to learn different ways of putting things in a simple design. So tonight we're going to be making some things that could be used for little greeting cards, or even, you know, depending on if you filled a whole page with something like this, you could put it in a little ready-made frame. You know, they're easily accessible that you could change out with the seasons. This is just a practice page that I was doing the other night. There's lots of ways to complete this, bringing in some ink work with your watercolor. And then earlier when I talked about just learning different brush strokes of, you know, ways to use various kinds of brushes. So I think tonight on the supply list was just like a number 6 or number 8, just a regular round brush. But I'll be talking about just some other kinds of brushes that, you know, maybe you want to find, you know, if you can find one in the bargain bin, or if you really want to spring for something new and fun, just different kinds and sizes of brushes and what they might be able to do for you. And let's see. And then once we talk about basic brushwork, here's a couple more practice pages where I was just doodling. Once you learn some basic strokes and how to manipulate your brush, you can go from making things like shamrocks to very stylized wreaths, bouquets. This is, you know, so none of these have pencil drawings involved. These are all just taking the brush and using different brush strokes to lay in things that look like wonderful flowers. So I didn't even draw a circle on here to, you know, make a design around. So all of these can be launched from what we're going to do this evening. So let me first find some scrap paper that I was going to use, and I'll just bring up some of this. So some of the basics strokes, well, actually first, let me back up just a bit. I was going to talk about my secret to watercolor, and I don't want to forget about that. So the secret to watercolor is, I'm just going to write it on here. But what this has to do with is the water to pigment ratio. So how much water versus how much paint. And if we think of it like food, it's going to make it so much easier. So I want you to draw off just maybe 5 boxes. And they don't have to be huge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whatever will fit on your page. This little pad is kind of on the smaller side. But the next thing we're going to do is pick whatever is your favorite color. Let's get these paints wet again. Give them a good squirt. Let's pick out, oh, maybe this nice cobalt blue. And I'm going to make a puddle. And I'm going to get it as thick as I possibly can. So the things that we're going to do is we're going to make 5 little boxes, and we're going to have squares, 1 square that's going to feel like butter, 1 square that's going to feel like cream, 1 square that's going to feel like milk, the next one's going to feel like coffee, and the last one is going to feel like tea. And it's going to feel like tea that's so weak it can't get itself out of the pot. Just super weak. That's my Irish joke for the day from my friend's Irish mom. So so when we talk about, you know, well, what does all this mean, this food equivalence? So these are all things that we're pretty familiar with in our daily lives, whether we drink coffee or tea or we've had milk. So say if you left butter out on the countertop and it got, you know, so you're not microwaving it, but just let it set out on the counter on a warm day and it gets sort of goopy. That would feel like paint that just comes straight out of the tube if you're using maybe tube paints. Now, if you've got like just a little box of like a box kit of the ready-made pans, it's going to be the same thing. Now, paint that has dried in the pans, you might have to work a little harder to get it to that consistency, but it will get there. So the thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to have to tickle it a little bit, tickle it with your brush until you get a consistency that feels sort of like butter that you've left out on the counter. And it may take a little while to get it. And it's really thick, just like you could imagine butter would feel thick. And so your brush moving this around is going to feel the same way as if you stuck a spoon in butter sitting on the counter, and it's sort of, really goopy, gushy. So now to get that to cream, we're going to add a little bit of water. So we're not going to water it down a lot. Just, you saw me pick up a little bit scoop of water out of my thing, and I'm going to add it to here. And so that's going to have this flowing a little bit softer. And you can see it's just a little bit lighter. Let's see if I can get it. There's still a glare on it because it's wet, but once this dries, this will be a little bit lighter than the butter. Now the next puddle I think of as milk, and I'm going to add a little more water. And the interesting thing about milk, we have whole milk, we have skim milk, and even when you're drinking the real thing or you're pouring it into coffee, you know the difference of when you pour like whole milk into a cup of coffee versus skim milk. Skim milk can be like, it's going to feel kind of watered down. So, I'm going to add a good bit more of water and just, stroke that down. So already I'm seeing it's going to be a little more pale than that cream. It's got more fluid in it. It's got more water in it. Now coffee, I'm going to add a little more water still, maybe several scoops of it. And I'm going to water that down quite a lot. And if I get too watery, I'm going to tap it on a paper towel, but you can see already what a difference between this versus that. Now, tea, that's, especially if it's really weak tea where you've just kind of dunked the tea bag and it's barely got a little tinge in the water. I'm going to make a puddle on its own, just a puddle of water. And you can see there's a little blue cast to that because there was some paint left in my brush, but maybe I'll pull another little puddle in. So it's still really watery. So it's this nice, soft, very soft tint. So you can see between here and here, what a difference. It's the same color of paint, whether I pulled it from a pan or whether I, squirted it into, from a tube into my own pan. So, so this little set that I have, it's, they're all tube paints that have been squirted in here, and I've let them dry so I can take them out on location with me if I want to go paint in the woods or seashore or whatever. And, when they get empty, I can refill them. But anyway, whether you use the ready-made ones or, you fill it yourself with paints that you've chosen, you can get out of one color this really nice big range. So the other thing, if you think of this like food, most of your meal, so when it comes to butter, most of your meal is going to be in this range. It's not going to be, and just like I'm considering food, most of a painting is probably going to be in this range of color. There might be a big area of, maybe it's the sky, it's going to be really pale like tea. And as far as butter goes, you're just going to have butter as an accent. So just like in a meal, you wouldn't want a whole meal with, 6 sticks of butter unless you're Paula Deen in her pre-diabetic days. But so butter, just think of that as an accent. And the person that I learned this from, it was at a plein air convention several years ago, and she was giving a demonstration, and this really helped me figure out this whole consistency, because I knew it in my head, but I wasn't able to put it into practice. And once I saw this, it really helped fit. It made sense. So she had a farm scene. She's from Pennsylvania, and she had a beautiful farm scene. There was a barn and a tractor and a fence line and trees, and the sun was coming through the trees and just hitting the tops of the fence line. And as she's painting, and she's painting this in front of us, and when she laid on that last little accent mark, that little butter on top of the fence line where the sunlight hit, it was the magic sauce that completed that painting. So, just like that, butter, and when it comes to food, butter can be a wonderful accent, but you wouldn't want a whole meal out of it. So that's, I think, the big secret. And so what I do recommend to all my students is, whether you're, if you're just starting out, do that with all of your colors, especially your yellows. We think of yellow as so pale, but we can still get a really good intensity on the yellows. And just like, your purples or deep browns and, some of your darker colors, we think of them as super dark. We can even get those colors super light. So take this exercise and play with your paints that you have, or, maybe you've been doing this for a while. Every time I buy a new color, I think, oh, there's something exciting. Daniel Smith has all these Primatech colors that are minerals. And so I've recently got Serpentine Genuine. Whenever I get a new color, I do the same exercise just to see what kind of range can I get out of this one little bit of paint. So the next thing I want to talk about is brushwork. How do we get the most bang for our buck out of this one little dinky little tool? What can it do for us? So let's take this little puddle of blue again. Let me get a little more pigment in there because I've got it watered down to tea. And whenever I'm painting, I'm just going to use this for my sample page, but I always have a little scrap paper where I'm always kind of testing colors. So even if I'm taking my sketchbook out, I've got, a scrap piece of paper that I've stuck in there just so I can test the color to see, is it milk? Is it tea? What range do I have it at? Is this dark enough, light enough, all that stuff. So I want to talk about the belly of your brush and the tip of your brush. So if we go up on the tip of our brush, we can get a really nice skinny line by just dragging that down. And a lot of people will say, well, I can't draw a straight line. And it might be because we're trying to draw by using our wrist, and then we run out of space. So if you draw from your shoulder, and I'm going to pop the camera up so I can show this a little better. So if you draw from your shoulder, use your shoulder like a hinge. Let me tilt this thing down. And so lay your hand on the paper and then pull that hinge back. So pull back from your shoulder and voila, you got a straight line. And if I had tried to do that with my wrist, you get 4 inches, then you have a curve, you're running out of space because you can't go any farther than that. So remember, your body is a tool too, not only your paintbrush. And a lot of times we think, oh, we got to do this and that'll help us make all the details. Sometimes using that whole arm, that's another one of the things that I found was so helpful. One of my teachers along the way taught me that, and back when I was really into oil painting, but it's really helpful. So we've got the point of our brush. Now, what about the belly? What is a belly besides what's under my shirt? So we have this little roundish part in here. That's the belly of your brush. And so we can manipulate the brush in different ways by pressing down, and we're going to get a lot from the belly. And then we can lift it back up to the point and then press it down again and get it back to the point. Let me get this darker because that is getting a lot of glare and I'm not seeing what I want to see. So let's darken this up with a little ultramarine blue. This is one of the fun things. I just love doing these paint strokes. Here's a little, this is easier to see. All right, so we can press down, lift up, press down and lift up. And, I could play around and do this all day. It's just really fun playing with this, and it's almost like playing music. It's sort of lyrical, just this little touch of the stroke and pull. So it's kind of a push down, lift and pull, push down and press, and then lift up. And if you've got a nice load on your brush, it will, you'll be able to make one long continuous line. Now, this brush, it's a Princeton velvet touch brush. They have a really nice point on it. It's a size 8 long round. So it might be just a little bit longer than a regular round, but it has, it's a synthetic, so it's not very expensive, and it comes, it'll hold a decent amount of paint because I can get a nice stroke all the way down my page. Now, it used to be, back when I started watercolor painting back in probably the early 80s, the thing was, all your teachers would tell you, oh, you have to have a sable-haired brush, which they were very expensive. I mean, back then, a brush like this would be at least $80. And the thought of, dropping this in the creek somewhere and losing it just panicked me. But also back then, the synthetic brushes weren't always very reliable. Sometimes the hairs would stick out horribly. So now they, with improved materials that they have, you can get a really decent synthetic brush that performs beautifully. And let me find some of these other ones. Here we go. So this is so Princeton, they make a series 4050R that I like a lot. It's 4050R for round. And I've got sizes from 2 that are really tiny, which I rarely use, size 6, which I use a lot. This one's a 16, which I use if I'm working on something larger. So when it comes to brushes, if you've got a lot of space to cover, you want a larger brush, because if you try to, say if you're going to paint in a whole sky and you're using a size 6, it's going to feel like sweeping your garage with a one-haired broom. It's going to be miserable. You're going to hate it, and it's not going to do the job well at all. So for most things in sketchbooks, I use a size 8 or a 10. If I'm going a little smaller, I'll use a size 6. And only rarely do I spring for the size 4 or 2, the really tiny stuff. Because generally I like looser, brushy paintings. So let me make sure I've got all the paint washed out of this stuff. So I want to talk about just some other brushes before we get into the brush stroke part. So, when it comes to what kind of strokes these make, there's other brushes out there. Like this is a silver black velvet. It's called a striper. And you can see already the end of this is kind of unusual. It's what they call a dagger end. It's kind of long, loose, and skinny, and it's cut into a angled shape with a long skinny spot. And I bought this one because another artist said, hey, this is fun. And that's actually why you should buy a brush. I mean, if it does something that you think you want to do or try, that's what makes this so much fun. But it's not, it's not necessary. And by any means, if you're doubting that you might get use out of it, then I wouldn't buy it. But when you're looking for the next fun thing, this is, another fun one to do. So, again, you can make a nice, long, wonderful skinny stroke. And then, just by twisting, pushing, and turning this, you can make these wonderful shapes. And so the next, jumping off point comes, rather than this long stripy thing, is, and here it's holds so much it's dripping off my brush, but you can make these individual leaf shapes by pressing your brush down, twisting and pulling. So you can see, if you were to put this on a long skinny stem, what a lovely little leaf that would be. You can kind of press it in both directions. So it's, another bit of fun. And let's see, when we have larger spaces and we need a larger brush, move this page. We can go to a big brush. Let me put some more pigment in my puddle here. And I want to make sure. So whenever you're going to use a big brush, you want to make sure you have a big enough puddle so that you don't use it up in 2 strokes. So bigger brushes mean you're going to need a lot more paint. It makes me think of Jaws. I need a bigger boat. You need a bigger boat. So anyway, so we're going to take this and we can do the same kind of thing. Again, this wonderful push-pull stroke, these twists and turns by pressing on the belly, pulling up to the point. And even with this big brush, we can still get a nice long skinny stroke. Now, once you get, once you get all that paint pushed out of it, you're gonna have to dip more. And speaking of dipping, one thing that I find that's a habit that I had for a long time before I learned that tea to butter thing. So I would try, as I'm painting and I'm using up all my puddle, and then I'm thinking, oh, but I've got this perfect color mix. I need to grow my puddle, so I'm just going to add some more water. Now my puddle's big enough, and I'd lay down a stroke, and it was so watery I could hardly see it. So if you're running into that, just beware that, especially if you're on the newer side of painting, it's normal. We all go through it. I went through it for years before I figured out this whole tea to butter thing. It was a struggle. So whenever you add water, so say you need to grow your puddle and you're adding water, remember you've got to add pigment so you can keep it at that milk consistency or coffee or whatever that initial consistency was that you had. So that leads us up to some fun strokes with, let me get this washed out of my brush. So on my, one of the things that you can't see because it's kind of out of view is water. And so this is another common question that I have, because right now I've got a bunch of dirty water. One of the habits that I'm trying to grow into is when I'm going to change water is I'll wipe my dirty brush off first, then swish my brush in my rinse thing. And then I usually have a clean cup of water as well. So when I'm working here in my studio, I usually have at least 2 cups. If I'm teaching a class, I have 4 cups, and usually one of them is really big. It's a big flower vase. It holds a ton. So when I'm ready to give a big swish, I'll just give, a super big swish in here, and I will pull the pigment out until it pulls clean. So I'm never running soap into my watercolor brushes. I think it can be a little problematic. So here I'm seeing there's a little bit of blue pigment right in here in the ferrule somewhere. So I'm going to keep swishing that until it runs clean. Just give it a good hard pull. And let's see. So let me get rid of that because that's starting to look messy already. So on our practice page of just making some strokes and shapes, let me move to my size 6 brush. So I'm going to talk about some basic strokes that I think will be fun for making little shamrocks. So one of the things that I did the other night as I was playing around with these shapes, let's see, I think I'll keep my water and paint over here, my test swatch down here, because this is the important page to see. So I'm going to pick up paint, and I've got my paint consistency probably in the milk range. I'll test it to make sure I like that. And so I'm going to play around making this little, like a little rounded curve shape like that. Let me bring this camera down just a little bit. You can see everything. And so I'm going to make this little round stroke, and then I'm going to make a little skinny stroke by going up on my the tip of the brush. So that first stroke is just, I'm going to lay the brush down and kind of push and pull. And if you get a little skippy mark, that's okay. If you get a little blossom that comes pushing back, that's okay. Don't let it panic you. And they may be a little bit different. That's okay too. It's just its personality. And as you're getting comfortable with that stroke. So I'm going to just play around with some of these strokes just to get the feel of this shape. And so part of that whole push and pull is, how much pressure do I, do I need to press on the belly of that brush to get, the really nice shape I want. And I probably want my brush loaded with the paint. So I'm going to have it, take a fresh dip. And I'm going to just push and pull. And then if I want to link these together in a shamrock, I'm going to turn my page a little just so it's easier to get that angle. And I'm going to do that right next to it. Give a little push pull and a little stroke. And I'm going to turn it again. I'm going to make a little 3-leaf shamrock because that's usually the kind of clover I see growing in my yard that I try to yank out and it keeps coming back. And then I'm going to make just a skinny little stroke by using the tip of my brush. And the little white spaces just looks like a little bit of reflected light, just a little bit of sparkle to it, which I think is kind of a nice, interesting look when we look at a whole page of these. So what's interesting is while this is still wet, you can pick up another color. Let's pick up some of this green and put that right next to there. Maybe some of that will bleed into it. Let's turn this a little bit. And it looks like my blue had started to dry just enough where there's not much bleed, but sometimes you get some really beautiful color bleeds while if you can paint them quick enough while they're going together. Let me go back to blue and see. Let's start with that one. It's a really pretty look. And you might find as you're playing around with these shapes, some of, maybe they're not uniform. So that's one of the things that as you're practicing and playing, it's like, think about how large do I want to make it? I find that it's great just to give yourself the freedom to have a practice page where it's no pressure. You don't have to show it to anybody. You're just going to play with the shapes until you get comfortable with these strokes. And even after you decide to make something that you want to, make a card or whatever, if it doesn't turn out the way exactly the way that you had hoped, it's okay. It's not going to be the last painting that you do. There's always the next one.
Roxanne, we have one question in the chat.
Yeah.
Is it best to have the scrap piece of paper be watercolor paper?
I usually do. And I usually my scrap paper is not a great watercolor paper. I'll use like a student grade paper. A really decent student grade paper that I like is the Canson watercolor paper. And I only say that it's not, the best paper because it's not made of 100% cotton. But of all the student grade papers, I find that this is pretty decent and you get a lot of bang for your buck. And it's what I'll be doing the next demo on tonight too. There's other papers that are more pricey. Let's see if I've got any sitting around. There's stuff like Arches paper. There's Stonehenge Aqua. cold press. And the reason that your more expensive papers are expensive is because, you know, they're made of 100% cotton. And the difference between cotton and wood pulp paper is the cotton absorbs it differently. So sometimes when you're using wood pulp paper, things will grab a little more quickly. It dries unevenly and it can be a little frustrating. So if you have stuff like that happening, know that the problem is not you, it's the paper. So my students are always amazed when they go to better quality paper that's like, wow, suddenly I feel like I'm a genius because things are working. So, but that being said, on my scrap paper, sometimes I've used just computer paper. Now I've tried using paper towels, which is so absorbent, you really can't see, you know, a decent stroke. But I have used, you know, when I'm in a real fix or a rush, I'll just grab something because my computer's just to the left of me. So I'll grab a piece of computer paper and that's okay. But if I'm using some kind of watercolor paper and rice paper, I have not worked on that in probably 25 years. It's something that I do want to play with again, because I think it's really beautiful. Yeah, I'm not sure about the price of rice paper. If it's, you know, more pricey, I think I would want to save it for my cool projects. But this Canson, again, it's priced decently. So I usually have a page of that pulled out and ripped in half, and I can use both sides of the paper when I'm, you know, just making my little swatches. So for me, I find it really helps. It's, you know, helps to have some kind of watercolor paper, but it's a good question. So once I, you know, have played around with my shapes, here I've got a little bit of other color that's mixed in with my blue. You know, and I'll continue making that shape. So once I feel like, okay, I've made my shapes, I want to make something of this now. And I'm going to get out a big page of, I'm going to use that Canson that I was just talking about. And it's not expensive. And sometimes you can get a real deal on it at Michael's Arts and Crafts. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just take this, it's a 9x12 page, and I've got a roll of washi tape, and you can find that at Michael's Arts and Crafts. And they come in different little patterns. This was on the bargain bin and it was a stripe, and I thought, oh, okay, it's, you know, when they mark it down, I go for that stuff, because usually I'm just taping it on something and then I end up throwing it away. So when you, you know, maybe you want to tape the edges of your page, or, you know, make a little dividing line. Whenever I'm going to use a piece of tape to stick on watercolor paper, I always stick it on my jeans first, just to kind of remove some of the stickiness off of it. So I just do this on top of my jeans leg, just to kind of remove the excess sticky. So that way it won't tear my paper when I go to remove it, because you know, so right now I can just kind of lift it off and it won't rip the paper. But if I didn't do that and it was, you know, the super sticky stuff, it would just rip the whole thing all the way down. So just be forewarned. Ask me how I know. I've done it before. So one of the things that I want to, I'm going to play around with a couple different designs. And one of the things that I think is kind of fun is, let's start off with this little exercise where we take one of the greens and we just add a lot of water. We're going to make it super pale, and then we're going to add a little more pigment still, and then we're going to make it kind of like cream or butter. So we're going to go through the tea, coffee, milk, cream, and do 4 rows like that. And it's actually kind of pretty. So I'm going to start with this little puddle of green that I have here. And you can use whichever green that you have. And I'm going to add a bunch of water. And I've got my number 6 brush, because this is a fairly small space. And let me raise the camera back up now so we can get everything hopefully in camera view. So I've did my little test swatch. I want it at least that watery. All right, so it's nice and pale. So, and I usually paint, I've always held a little bit of paper towel in my left hand. I'm right-handed. And just to kind of dab my brush if I feel like I've got too much liquid in there. So I'm going to make my first row of little shamrocks. And I'm going to try to do it without turning the page just so we can see it. Oops, see it on camera. Sorry about that. Let's do that again. I think I might be able to fit 3, maybe 4. And we'll just join them side by side like that. And so it's nice and pale. And now we're going to add a little bit more pigment to that. Maybe I'll add a little bit of yellow green. I think I'll just pop up the color a little bit. So let's get, make sure that's not too watery. A little more body. So I want it to be not like tea, but more like coffee to skim milk. I just want to see a little bit of difference in the pigment there. So the nice thing about this is it's an easy design and it allows you to play around and make some fun little groupings of design. So bring that over this way. And I can see I've got some space here, but we can cut our card accordingly. Now the next row, I'm going to have it a little bit darker still. Maybe I'll bring in some of this turquoise color, throw that in there. Ooh, that's almost buttery. That's, whoa, way too much. So I'm going to add some water to knock that back. That's a little bit more intense than I wanted to go. So that's why I always have this test sheet, because it's like that first big splash was, I went straight to butter, which I didn't quite want that. So now I've got it watered down. I'm liking what I see. So before I knew that tea to butter thing, and I, got into the habit of having a scratch paper, it's like my paintings would be inconsistent because I couldn't see what I was ending up with before I started laying it on my paper. And it's pretty frustrating. All right, so I'm gonna get this different green and make a little row of short shamrocks. I made that first stem kind of long. Let's grow that a little bit. And we'll get to the last one on this row. So one of the things you also want to consider while you're laying these strokes down is you kind of want to get it in one stroke. You don't want to have to go back in and lay things over it, because if you go back in to try to fix something like, ooh, there's a little funky place, let me piddle with it, it's going to start looking murky. So whatever happens, just let it happen. And that is part of the charm of it. Sometimes these little run backs, these little splurps, these little, where one touches the other and they kind of fuse together, it's part of the beauty of watercolor. And when we do that, it's really quite lovely. All right, I want something a little bit darker. So I think I'm going to add some ultramarine blue to my green and get a really deep, rich, luscious pine green. And I kind of want it like cream. I want some cacao, but I don't want it so heavy that it blocks the light, because part of what I love is being able to see through to the white of the paper. And if I go from cream and get it too close to butter, it's going to kind of kill off that luminosity. So the nice thing about this exercise is that it lets you kind of practice that brushwork, you've got a simple design. You don't have to think of anything genius about it. It's just, you know, shamrocks, boom, brushwork. I get to play with this and entertain myself and learn that tactile feeling of how much pigment do I want to get the look that I want. So then we've got that, and we've got, you know, this nice little practice piece that when we, you know, come to some other things, we'll, you know, when we go to our other little practice areas, it'll allow us to try it all over again in just a different way. So another one of the boxes that I did was I had 4 rows of shamrocks, just like that. And then I left the middle row open and I did some lettering in there. And it looks like, wow, I have some pretty nice handwriting. So what I do when I want something to look really neat and tidy, because my handwriting is anything but tidy, is I will, I'll take a ruler and make some space in there. So I've got this nice little clear ruler, and I will draw in pencil what I want to put down. So, and I won't be teaching a class in lettering tonight, but for those of you that want to try out some things, I've got some fun suggestions. So I will have, you know, I will make a little 3 lines like that, and I can have the top line and the midline of a letter. So just like when we were learning how to write things in first grade, you know, we've got that top line, midline, and the baseline, and I'm just going to write lucky in just what I call my default lettering. So this isn't super fancy, but it's something that I do that I kind of developed freehand after a while. And I'm going to write lucky. So some of these fonts, these lettering styles, when I teach, I do teach a lettering class in one of my series, and there's different styles of fonts that we can learn how to do. And some of them, if I'm going to use them, you know, I've got to look at the sheet to see what it, you know, looks like, and slowly and laboriously do that. There is a website called dafont.com. I'm going to put that in the chat bar. Whoops, that's daft. Doggone, is autocorrect. Thinks I want to write daft. It's dafont. Dafont.com. Okay. Don't you dare correct me now, computer. All right, dafont.com. And there are some beautiful styles in there. It is just like rows and rows and rows of all kinds of font styles. One that I really love is called Mirgen. And I hope I'm pronouncing it right. M-U-I-R-G-E-N. It's super lovely. And it's one that I'm playing with on a lot of my designs right now, because it's like I would love to get it to where it just comes out of me. This is what comes out of me right now, and that's after working, you know, just playing around with this for a long time. So what I'll do if I'm doing, you know, a design where I've got some painting in, and then I want to do some lovely font in there, I'll pencil it in, and then I'll take an ink pen, and I'll either use my fountain pen with permanent ink, or I will use one of these Pigma Micron pens. The thing that you want to make sure is that you have waterproof ink. So this little Pigma Micron, they come, you can get them at Michael's and online. And they come in different nib sizes. This is a 03, and it looks like, get something under my hand. It's about this size of line. So I will use my ink on top of all the pencil, and then I'll get it all inked in. And I'll give it maybe 10 minutes just for the ink to dry. Usually it dries pretty fast, but sometimes I've kind of rushed it and I start erasing and I get a little smear. And then it's like, oh, rats. Now I've got to either disguise it or paint white over it or do some Photoshop magic on top of it if I'm, putting it in the computer. So that goes pretty quickly. And then once that ink is dry, I use what's called a kneaded eraser, just like you knead bread. So K-N-E-A-D, kneaded eraser. And I used to think these were the nastiest looking things when I went to, my first art classes way back when. And I thought, why did they have us get this thing? I don't even know what to do with it. And I just, it laid in my art bag until the teacher actually showed us what to do with it. And then it was like, this is a genius tool. It's awesome. So the nice thing is it comes in a little, rectangular little thing. And sometimes they can be, a little larger, but usually they're about maybe that big. And then you unwrap the plastic off of it. And what's nice about it is once you go to erase all that graphite off of your paper, for one thing, it doesn't scuff up your paper like other erasers might do. So when you're working on watercolor paper or anything that you don't want damaged, you want something that's not going to rough up your paper. And then once it's full of graphite, you knead it and squish it back in. And it's like, it's kind of like a big hunk of silly putty when you were a kid. You press a design and it shows up on here, and to get rid of it, you just fold it back in. So it's sort of self-cleaning, and they can last for ages. So once I feel like my ink has dried, I'm going to gently, rub back over that ink and lift all that. And then suddenly it looks like, wow, it's really pretty. It's nice. And it's big enough where I can paint inside here. If I want to take, a little brush, I can take a small little number 4 brush and fill in my letters, and they're nice and crisp with the ink. And then I've got this, beautiful color in there. And it's a really pretty look. So that's how I would lay the ink in, the paint in. So, there's all these different designs. You don't have to use green for your shamrocks. Try it in some of the other colors just to practice getting your lights to darks. Or sometimes you might have maybe some unusual paint. Maybe you've sprung for like a tube of moon glow and you want to see, okay, what is that going to do for me? What can I get with that? Or, indigo, some of these different colors that they have. Or maybe you want to have a design where you pop one in, and then also you can lay some ink around it. I love this look with just plain brushwork, but sometimes you want to play with a little ink, and you can take, let's see if I can get the camera to focus on that. So you can take the ink and don't feel like you have to be exacting. Make that look like your handwriting. Make it look loose, juicy, and wonderful. And maybe put some little dots around the one that's special. You can also come in with, there's other little fun tools like these Posca paint pens. Let's see if this is the one that, they come in different size nibs. Let's see. And of course I didn't shake this up today, so I should have shaken that up earlier. But the nice thing is they have this wonderful little point, so you can make these little dots, and they are filled with, I think it's acrylic paint. So it's like a little acrylic paint pen, and they make these lovely little dots and lines. So you can kind of embellish your darker things. It's, really pretty. So that, I think, brings me to all of the fun that I think I'm going to share with you today. But know that you can make this in, like if you want to take a 9x12 and make 4 little cards in those samples that I showed you, or if you can do, you can do a whole page of this. It might be really pretty to have, the top portion of your page in this soft, watered down tea version. Then as you move down the page, get a little darker and darker. And then you could take this, stick it in like a ready cut mat, it's a standard size. And then, at Michael's, just pop that thing in and you've got a fun little thing to hang on the wall for the month. And then Debbie asked, do you use a special pencil to do your lines and lettering? I use a Bic #2. And if I don't have that laying around, I've got just kind of anything. So one thing that I have found when I'm doing class demos, I have a really dark pencil made by Blackwing. And I bought them because they're kind of velvety and nice to draw with, but they're really dark. And so what I find, they're dark enough to show up on camera when I'm doing a class demo, but they're so dark that they're a little harder to erase. So when I'm working, I want something that's going to be light enough, it's going to be dark enough for me to see, but also light enough to erase. And if I'm working on something that I really don't want to show up, I will use, let's see, where is that? Maybe an HB pencil, just so it's, pretty light. And the other thing that you want to make sure is when you're working for yourself is just keep the stroke really light and kind of soft. You don't want to dig in because, let me see if I can show you what will happen. So if you really dig in, and I mean like really hard, you might be able to erase it, but it's gonna be harder. In fact, that's not even erasing. But when you go to stroke paint on top of it, all the paint is going to sink down in that little divot, and see how the paint's gathering down there, and suddenly it goes from pencil dark to super dark because all the pigment's kind of laid in that ditch that you just dug in that pencil stroke. So that's a good question, when it comes to, pencils, and that's whether, maybe you're drawing a more intricate design, rather than just loose painting designs. So, and that's true too, if you're gonna, once you've practiced the shamrock designs, and now you want to go to something like maybe a wreath and start playing around. So you can see these little flower bud shapes, they are just that same shamrock stroke, except I've got 2 fat ones rather than a fat and a skinny one. Some are kind of squished together. And some I've put like a little trio together to make a bigger blossom. So that stroke that we learned tonight, that is in here, and these longer leaves are the long stroke that we did with, that same brush when you do like a long push and pull. Let's see, kind of back here. Yeah. So we can take, just our same brush and do just longer strokes and make, wonderful leaves. So if I were going to, on this case, I did not draw a circle first, and it's kind of like a little bit mushy because it kind of morphs to one side and it's kind of heavy near the bottom. But if you want to draw a circle first, just to kind of give you a guideline, I would do a really soft circle in a light pencil, because if you, like I said, if you go too heavy, all that pigment's going to run into the ditch that you've just dug by digging in too hard. So let me pop up here back face to face and see if there's any other questions that people have before we call it a night. Because y'all have been asking some really good questions. I want to make sure I go through the chat board and see if there's anything that I might have missed.
I don't see any others, but I definitely enjoyed learning about the different tools. Oh,
Yeah.
and this
Oh,
says,
the
come back and
tape.
show us more. So hopefully, we hope
Yes.
so.
Good. Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. So yeah, we'll keep coming up with some fun things that you can do in an hour or two, just, some really quick things. So this is the kind of project when you want to paint, but you don't know what to paint, or maybe you're starting out, or maybe you only have a short amount of time. These little exercises, they kind of give you that brush mileage that we all need. And then you end up with something really fun too. So sometimes, it's like, well, I just don't want to do a little doodle. I want something really nice. These little, what I call brush mileage exercises, they give you that, it's kind of like athletes train and, musicians practice scales. It's like the same kind of thing. A musician can practice scales and you're thinking, wow, it's great. The kind of tape, before I forget, is called Washi Tape, and I'll put it in the chat board here. Washi Tape. And when I first heard of Washi Tape, a friend of mine, Jane LaFazio, told me about this, and I'm like, what is Washi Tape? And I think a lot of crafters use it in maybe scrapbooking. It can be used for all kinds of stuff. And I've seen watercolorists maybe incorporate it into a sketchbook page, or a lot of them will just tape off edges. So the nice thing about it is when I want to lift it, I can pull it off without it ripping my paper. However, make sure that you take it and just do one of these on your blue jeans, or something just to kind of get the extra stickies off, and then it'll make a nice border. So you could paint all the way up to that edge, and it will keep a nice little white stripe down the middle. So I'll just leave that on for now. So yeah, it's kind of handy. I used to think, I don't need it, but it's a lot of those tools that we think, we don't need that. Sometimes it's just nice. It's fun to play around with. So I'm all for having fun. That's what this should be. It should be all about fun. Oh, any more questions?
No, but thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for coming tonight, you guys. I really enjoyed it, and I love I love watercolor. So I'm hoping you do too, and learn to have a really good time with it.
Well, I think we'll all get a lot of mileage out of this. I know I have some fun myself here with my watercolor paper. So thank you so much, Roxanne, and thank you everybody for joining us and having
Thanks.
and happy.
Oh, it's great to see Ann Malinak. Hey, good to see you.
I almost said happy Thanksgiving, but it's St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Patrick's Day. And
all right,
join us at the end. And again, we'll put this video up on our YouTube page by next week, and then we can all practice again.
Sounds great. Thanks, everybody. I sure appreciate it.
Thanks.